One of the things we did to kind of shape the battlefield was have a pretrial hearing to bring in the lead SIU detective. Mic drop moment of that hearing was the detective pronouncing that her investigation was concluded. She did not find any criminal offense.
Welcome back, viewers, watchers, listeners. I'm your host, Tyler Owen.
And Clint McNear.
What's going on?
Normally it's a really smooth drive in. This morning was almost 4 hours. I don't know what the deal was, but it was horrible. How are you?
Good. Everything's going good. We just all got back from D.C. and it was a good trip. Paid tribute to the fallen. So several of us went. And man, what a week that is. If you ever get the chance to make it up to D.C., anybody watching, listening, strongly urge you to get up there and participate in that.
Yep, bucket list item for sure.
Absolutely. Who we got on today?
Two superstars here in Austin. Been in the news a little bit lately, and kind of honored to have them on because it's an uphill battle defending law enforcement a lot of times in this day and time, and then depending on where at in the state and the politics of that area, it can be about 10 times more challenging. So a couple of star attorneys from around here. I'll let you gentlemen introduce yourselves.
Hey, well, thanks for having us on. I'm Doug O'Connell, and I'm with
Ken Ervin.
Welcome on, guys.
Yeah, welcome on. I will throw out there a couple weeks ago, most likely because of y'all's success and y'all's, well, I should say aggressiveness. I'll go ahead and leave it as success. We actually did meet with Jose Garza at the DA's office. It was a pleasant meeting. It went decent. We'll see how those talks continue. But because of y'all's success again in the courtroom, and you guys are going to dive off into a couple of cases. But yeah, so great job.
You know, I don't think aggressiveness is the wrong description. We know that when an officer is charged and we're representing them, the best thing we can do is, to the greatest degree possible, be on the offensive to dictate the tempo and the shape the battlefield.
Yep.
And we've learned from our officer clients the concept that action beats reaction, and we try to bring that to bear in criminal cases whenever we can.
And I think that's a good point, and I don't think it's unfair to say, generally, you want your attorney to be methodical and professional, but that all changes, as you said, on the battlefield. You got to change accordingly. And, you know, the DA at one time posted, if you're interested in prosecuting police, we're hiring, come on down here. Well, if that's not aggressive, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And so if you know someone is already postured looking to aggressively prosecute police, the defense better be equally as aggressive, ready to figure out how to operate in that battle space, because if they're coming aggressively, you better have a plan on how to defend that, and you guys have done a phenomenal job with it. Before we get started in this, we'd like to start from the ground floor. Just tell us a little bit about who you guys are, where you grew up, background about you, and then kind of what steered you in the direction of where you're at today.
Sure. Right. Ken Irvin moved to Austin in 97. Enrolled at UT, got a philosophy degree. Didn't know what I was going to do Didn't know what I was going to do, really, period.
Born in Texas, from here?
Yeah, from Amarillo, Texas.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Born in Arlington, but don't remember that. So raised in Amarillo, and moved out pretty much as quick as I could after high school to go somewhere else. So moved here to Austin, actually with a band. That didn't last very long, about 6 months before we hated each other. So enrolled in school, and then it was law school after that. Practicing law seemed appealing to me. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I was always drawn to the criminal world, whether it was watching cops or maybe courtroom TV shows. So it didn't matter where else I looked, what other fancy legal jobs there are. That was just what I wanted to do. So went to work as a prosecutor. First misdemeanor.
Or Travis County?
Yeah, Travis County, and then felony for 5 years. So total about 11 years as a prosecutor.
Nice.
And then jumped ship. But the tail end of my time at the DA's office was extraordinarily important because I was in the unit then called Critical Incident Unit. and that investigates officer involved shootings, in custody deaths. So I was going out to shooting scenes and OISs, right, for 3 years, a little bit longer, and then investigating those cases and then presenting them to a grand jury for review, which was the policy of the DA at that time, who was Rosemary Lindbergh. And at the time, they're thoroughly investigated by whatever the department is that's investigating, and then us as well. And then we would go in and give a very neutral, factual presentation to the grand jury and what laws may or may not apply. But we really gave it up to them. We didn't look for indictments. We didn't look for no bills either. It was just, this is everything we could possibly give you. And it was a policy of her and some other DAs, including Garza now, to have a grand jury review everything. And there are some benefits to that. There's some drawbacks too. But that was the policy. But that experience was enormously helpful, obviously, to now defending police officers. So I finally made the jump to defense work, and I believe it was the first week that I was doing that. Awesome police officer named Donald Petrides came in to see my senior law partner, referred to him because he was under a very quick investigation. His case was going to be going to grand jury very soon, extraordinarily quickly. Well, my partner was about to leave for Europe for a month and just couldn't do it, but I was perfect for it. I mean, that was my favorite part of being a prosecutor, was in that unit.
Backbone.
Yeah. So perfect fit. Took him on, represented him, and that's how I first connected with Doug. There were 2 defendants charged, Donald Petrides and then Rob Paff, who hired Doug. So we kind of knew each other. We were actually on opposing sides a few times. So he represented at least one, if not 2.
Couple.
Yeah, police officers undergoing grand jury review that I was conducting. And so we were opposing counsel a couple of times. Didn't talk too much. I was kind of scared of him. I was actually intimidated. And I don't say that about really anybody. But it was a vibe. It was a little bit scary. But, okay. Grand jury did the right thing for both of his cases. So teamed up. I realized he's not as scary as I thought. He can be, but there's lots of sides to everybody. And then it's just been extraordinarily easy to work with them from that point forward. And we jointly represent pretty much any police officer that comes to either one of us, because we're a really good fit in terms of what each person, strengths and limitations. Yeah. Right. We kind of make up for that mutually.
How long practicing law altogether?
Since 2007, whatever that number is.
Nice.
Being where you're at now as defense, the prior DA was also on the Democratic Party, correct?
Correct.
Typically, a DA's office is very, mirrored to a sheriff's office. They typically bring in people who have the same values, have the same political mindset. You being now on the defense side and seeing what was your office then, what is your opinion and what is your views now of what the DA's office truly? Clint says it best when he says that some of the current DAs in Texas, these what we consider rogue DAs in the very, very blue cities, weaponize Texas penal code to fit their political agenda. We had Democrat DAs before all this bullshit happened, and it's gotten worse. And so what's your thoughts on that, and kind of what's your viewpoints now as being someone who has represented that office before?
It's a really horrible combination of politics, but it's ignorance too. I mean, it's at least half. So you get a certain DA who gets elected to a big county and has very little experience actually as a prosecutor, whether it's trying cases or defending them, or even with the very niche world of police tactics and use of force. So that person is just a regular citizen who gets elected, but they're coming in with all the knowledge a regular citizen has, which is next to zero or zero. And so if you're a certain person, you have these certain ideas about how police officers work or should work, or the abuses, right, and the targeting, the racism, all of the sort of things that you can hurl out. And what they don't realize is I'm not saying those things don't exist ever, but it's not like you think. And so when I worked as a prosecutor investigating police cases, it was just such an eye-opener to see the vast majority of people who sign up for this job, they're just regular people. They have families and they right to go home, and they want to do the right thing, and they're police officers for the right reasons. And nobody's perfect in their job, but there can be enormous consequences for getting something a little bit wrong as a police officer. So it was discovering the nuance of the job, of what it's like to be on the street and have to make these critical split-second decisions where something can go really horrible, or really right, depending on what you do. And it's just such a fine line sometimes.
Yep.
So you start to appreciate the difficulty behind the job, but you also appreciate the people, too, that are underneath the uniform and realize maybe they're not what you had thought. So, but going back to the DA, that person, if they don't, have any of that knowledge, and if they're not getting it from an institution that they join, then they're just left with these bad preconceived notions. Get a lot of indictments because it's easy to do, and we can talk about grand jury manipulation and how you could do that. But we're seeing the results now, which is nothing. Nobody's getting convicted. We have acquitted some police officers. Some have had mistrials, but nobody's been convicted yet. And so it's a long time coming, but that DA is getting the reality check that it's not what you thought it was.
Yep.
And it's not easy at all. It's going to be painful, at least every time we're involved.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's hard to digest. I've been around law enforcement 30 years. My dad spent 35 years working police shootings and working crimes against persons in Dallas PD. So I grew up around police department and DA's offices, and law enforcement and the DA's office are not on the exact same team, but by God, we should be partners with the same mission, which is justice.
Yeah, the greater good.
The greater good of justice. And if somebody commits a crime, being sure they get a fair trial and they go to prison, or whatever justice looks like for them. But we're partners in that. And the pure adversarial relationship that 4 or 5 of the major cities around Texas and even across the country, that it's not even close to a partnership. It's sometimes just purely outright adversarial.
It's hostile.
In the weaponization of the law, there's an officer, I'm retired from Garland, there's an officer from my agency that is indicted for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon by a peace officer by threat. I pulled my gun in the early 90s. I pulled my gun probably 6 times a night. I guess I committed aggravated assault with a deadly weapon by threat by a peace officer 6 times a night for 10 years in the 90s. How you stretch the law just to achieve a political agenda, man, it's abuse. It's abuse. And so we've gone from not even being a partner for justice to, being
enemies,
and being enemies. And the only people it really hurts in the end is the community, because they're not getting the effective justice that they need, because we're all fighting behind the scenes and playing games, and it's really, really, really a disappointment. And we've talked on here a lot about, hopefully at some point the reasonable people in the large communities wake up and realize, elections have consequences. And
It's so bad in Austin that we've had clients who are detectives tell us that the majority of the detectives in Austin, when they have to talk on the phone to an assistant DA, they are recording that phone call to protect themselves. That's how bad the level of trust is.
And the effects ripple. I mean, they're very concrete, like you said, to the community. So, new DA comes in and police officers start getting indicted left and right. The effects are people are retiring early. They're even buying forward to retire early because it's just they want out because every shift I go on is another chance for something to go wrong, and now I'm next. Less proactive policing.
Yep.
Because and you hear this, we hear it from people we represent, even in Show Up. At first maybe it was just suggested, hey, maybe just take your calls, and then it's just take your calls.
Yeah.
You go, and if you're stirring up interactions and you're looking for enforcement actions every single time, is again, that could be your indictment.
Yeah,
so
depolicing is real. People often ask, "Oh, is depolicing real?" Or I promise you, depolicing is real.
Yeah.
That and promoting too, people who really love to be street officers getting out and promoting when that person is such a good fit and so ideal and so helpful for the community, and you lose them. And so it's, more of a series of new officers and just a lot of inexperience, which, can work, but it's not ideal.
Well, Doug, where'd you grow up and how did you get in law?
Yeah, so I grew up in Maryland and ended up down here because my first, I was in the Army after college, so my first assignment was at Fort Hood, now known as Fort Cavazos. And Killeen, back in the late 80s, was a desolate kind of place. And so we would come down to Austin to hang out on 6th Street, try to meet girls. And sure enough, I fell in love with this town. It's not the same town it was back then, but
It was just weird. It wasn't dangerous.
yeah. After law school, like Ken, I got a job at the county attorney's office, and then I moved to the DA's office, and then for a period of time, I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor. And then after 9/11, I got called back to the military a bunch. And then after that was all over, entered private practice. And then Ken, like he described, we ended up teaming up to represent Paff and Botrytis, and those guys were acquitted, and we had a lot of fun representing them and figured out we worked well together. And so now we continue to represent officers, not just APD officers. We've done DPS officers, other surrounding jurisdictions. We recently represented Zach Camden, a Tmpa member.
Yeah.
Where at in Maryland, and what was your MOS in the Army?
So Howard County, Maryland. So that's kind of north of both D.C. and Baltimore.
Okay.
And in the Army, I started out as an engineer officer and then later became a Special Forces officer at Green Beret.
Oh, nice. Excellent. Listened to a podcast on the way down here with a really sharp Green Beret guy that specializes in Russian now and got a son in the Navy trying to transfer over to, speaks Arabic, so he's trying to transfer over to Green Berets because he's a bit bored in the Navy. That's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
Appreciate your service.
Thanks.
What law school? UT?
I went to Wake Forest in North Carolina for the first 2 years, and that's where the degree is from, but I knew I wanted to live in Austin, and so I did the third year of law school at UT as a visiting student.
Nice.
That's awesome. So speaking of the recent victory, let's dive off into the Tmpa member Camden, and let's talk about how your involvement got involved with this case, and kind of how that case got kicked off.
Yeah. So early on, that case was languishing for a long time,
Years,
and had sat at the DA's office unindicted with no interest in doing anything.
Was Garza DA when that first leak kicked off, or was it?
No, it was his predecessor, Margaret Moore.
Okay.
And so the case was languishing. We believe they didn't intend to do anything with it. And then, of course...
already indicted?
No.
Not even indicted?
Not even indicted. Nothing going on with it. And then the media got a hold of the APD officer who assisted them, got a hold of his body cam and published it and wrote a expose, if you will. And, of course, this was on the heels of the George Floyd incident. And so the decedent in the Camden Johnson case also said something along the lines of, "I can't breathe." And all of a sudden you had a media sensation, spectacular.
And this was post-election or during the election, during Garza's election for office?
In the early days of the election, but he had not been elected, but he used that
In his campaign.
and said, "I'm going to fight for justice for the Ambler family." Now, keep in mind, he had not seen any evidence. He had not seen the case file. He didn't have access to anything.
Right.
But he concluded that from a media report that Zach and JJ had violated the law and he was going to prosecute them and seek a conviction.
Ballpark at that time, how long had that case been sitting unindicted? And
I want to say plus or minus a year, long enough under the previous DA that if it was a problem and they thought there was a crime, it would have been indicted. And so Doug described it as languishing, and it was kind of languishing. You know, it's not. They haven't issued a declination letter saying we're not going to take this to grand jury, but they hadn't taken it to grand jury either. But there was certainly no urgency.
Okay.
And our opinion is because the previous DA didn't think there was a crime.
And for those that don't know the case that we're referring to, it was two Williamson County deputies, evening, night, I'm not really sure the time of day, had a pursuit. Began in Williamson County, ended in Travis County. My understanding is very close to where this office sits today.
Yep.
The subject continued to resist upon his exit of the vehicle. During the deployment of a taser, he subsequently ended up dying. During him resisting, essentially. There was a heart condition. I mean, there's a whole lot to this case, and then we're gonna dive into it. That's kind of where you guys got brought in, and now this case has been sitting. So for those that don't know, it was a very publicized, high-profile case here in Austin. As you're telling, I did not know about him using as a campaign slogan, essentially, to get in office. Makes sense.
How far into the case? How far after the incident did you guys become involved?
Probably a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Garza is campaigning and naming this case by name, saying he's going to get justice for the Ambler family. And yeah, it was time to freak out and get an attorney, and that's what they did.
Yep.
In anticipation of what was coming. The other big part of this case was the live PD aspect of it.
Yeah.
Because they were in the car and filming, and we're doing that with Williamson County Sheriff's Office at the time.
Which is that's around two. We'll probably have to follow back up within a year or so.
Which got its own law passed.
Yeah.
It did.
Yeah, it did.
And during that time, the case had been languishing. The district attorney's office tried to send a subpoena to New York City to obtain the video footage from Live PD. And they sent the wrong subpoena. They sent an in-state subpoena to an entity out of state. And so the New York City lawyers laughed at them. The Live PD video was never produced to the DA's office. We never got to use it. We felt like that would have been the best evidence showing our clients didn't do anything wrong, because you had a professional cameraman.
Two of them with professional cameras basically standing over Zach and JJ while they grappled with this 400-pound man.
Yeah.
Interesting question, and I'm completely asking out of ignorance, but a private entity like a Live PD, are there retention requirements?
Yeah.
On a private organization?
These are some complicated legal questions. So, yes, they had their own. So this is, just to be clear, this is not our case, and we don't represent the two people who are still under indictment for the disappearance of that footage. But, of course, it was in our world because that came out of the use of force incident that we did handle. Yes, there were retention policies, and there were policies of Live PD, the show as well, which was if somebody dies during a law enforcement encounter, that's not aired. And so that footage was always going to be deleted and written over. So the process, as we understand it, was there are just SD cards, and they're shipped to the Live PD cameraman. They fill them up, and then they ship those back to New York. And so there's a constant rotation of new and used footage. And there's just not unlimited storage everywhere all the time. And so if something is not used on this expensive SD card for this camera, it just gets written over and it gets put back into circulation. So because of the death, it was never going to get used. And yeah, we believe it appears just the normal operation of the show wrote over the footage. And that they probably would have produced it, maybe, if they had received the proper subpoena in time or were asked, but it didn't happen. But it gets more complicated than that because they're a private entity showing a reality TV show, they may have some First Amendment protections just like the media, and police may not have been able to even legally seize that footage. Just like a police officer can't take the camera right of a reporter at the scene of something. It's a First Amendment right.
And I guess that was my thought asking the question is if I own my own private company, I don't have a law. There's no law that says I must retain this or, I mean, depending on what my company is affiliated, involved with, but
Definitely no law. Definitely no law that says you have to keep that.
okay.
None.
Okay.
It's good to know.
Yeah, just the more I got to thinking about it. And what's weird, completely out of ignorance, because I watched this case play out from a distance, is the media made it appear that, no one wanted that video to surface, and then to hear you guys say the video would have probably been really, really helpful to our case as an outsider that just kind of followed through the media.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, yeah, everybody hopes this thing disappears so that it can never come to light. And it's really fascinating now to hear, hell yeah, we'd love for people to have actually seen what the facts were as they played out.
Yeah, so, part of our job in any trial is educating the jury about why officers do what they do. And part of that is to describe the training they received at the academy and after the academy. Part of it is to explain procedures that civilians may not understand and the why behind that. And so having a camera on top of a panoramic view, if you will, of this attempting to take Ambler into custody,
Right.
would have been spectacularly helpful for us.
As he's continuing to resist.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this case was going on a year. I do want to point out something. Tiger, to my knowledge, we were looking at this about 4 months ago. Tiger Hanner originally had showed up to the scene that night to represent, I believe, Camden, if not both. At what point did you guys get involved in this case? Was it was with Camden, correct?
It was both at the same time. I was trying to remember exactly how that worked. I know JJ came to me. I know Zach was at the office. It's been so long. I don't remember initially how we hooked up.
We had our initial meeting with both of them, and Tiger had contacted me prior to that meeting when it was apparent to everybody that these guys were in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tiger, he's got his role in his field, and he knew this is going criminal, and that's not my field, and then it was time to hand off.
Well, you guys have a track record of success with Travis County, and that's the Super Bowl essentially, right? So, kudos to him for recognizing, what's going on.
Yeah, Tiger does a great job.
He does a
too.
great
Shout out
job.
to Tiger.
Yeah. So anyway, a squirrel moment. Sorry. So you guys get the case. You're reviewing it. Kind of let's walk us through the process of, okay, now we have Garza's elected, and then the indictments probably come thereafter. And then now we're starting to really see, okay, this has hit the fan, and we're zoned in.
Yeah. So one of the things we routinely do initially in every case is to file a bunch of motions, legal motions. Some of those are boilerplate just to get them on the books so we don't have to worry about them later while we're trying to prepare important stuff. But some of those are designed to influence the direction of the case from the perspective of the judge. In other words, try to educate the judge to the degree we can through pretrial motions. And so we did that while also reaching out and interviewing everybody we could. So we were trying to talk to the live PD camera people. Their attorneys wouldn't let us near them. We interviewed Austin Police Department officers who responded and tried to help Zach and JJ. We looked at all the body cam video from APD we could get a hold of, all of that sort of thing to jumpstart our representation of these guys.
And APD was the investigating agency, I guess, per se, or was it the DA's office themselves?
It was APD, yeah, Austin Police Special Investigations Unit.
Okay.
There was some, I guess, confusion that night because it was Williamson County Sheriff's Department, and they're going to have their internal affairs to do.
Right.
But yeah, after I guess some talking about it, it was APD SIU who handled it. No criminal investigation to speak of from Williamson County.
Okay.
So, speaking of SIU, one of the things we did to kind of shape the battlefield was have a pretrial hearing to bring in the lead SIU detective. And the mic drop moment of that hearing was the detective pronouncing that when her investigation was concluded, she did not find any criminal offense. And so again, that probably never made it into the media, but certainly the judge heard that.
Can I take time out? Two important things that just popped into my head with that. Years ago, I worked officer-involved shootings. You have officers that show up that night. You have all these different players, but the SIU detective is the keeper of all the facts. So the person that responded to the scene, that has collected crime scene, all these things, that's who used to testify at grand jury, because they're the one person that is the holder of the facts. There's some counties now that don't allow the lead detective to testify in grand jury on an officer-involved shooting. Now we have some counties that won't allow the lead detective because of what you just said. They won't call him as a witness. I know of 2 instances in North Texas where the state's lead detective is a defense witness.
That's you described, I think, every case we have.
What a upside down, turned around, backwards. Two of them specific, I know personally in Dallas. The star witness for the defense is the lead detective that the state tried to block from being able to testify.
Right. Yep. And they can do that early on. They can do that with grand jury. It's right. And having taken cases to grand jury, you can see how extraordinarily easy it would be to abuse that. Yep. You control the flow of information to what these 12 average people hear, and you can control what they see and what they don't. So if I just give you what I think you need to see to get a result, it's very easy to do. And that's extraordinarily frustrating because there's very little that we can do about that. We can raise hell about it in the media. We can try to get into the grand jury room, but it's at the DA's discretion, and they can say yes or no, and they can kick the lead detective out if he's not going to say the right things, or they could try to change his testimony.
But it lends credibility to the old saying, you could get a ham sandwich indicted.
100% true.
I mean, when I get to dictate exactly what the 12 people are allowed to hear, you can get an indictment. If that's solely your purpose there, you can get an indictment.
Yeah. No doubt.
And you just hit on it exactly, right? If that's your purpose, and that is the purpose, I think. It's just to get the indictment. Yep. Whether you're wrong about thinking you can prove the case later on, it can also be you just don't care. You just want the indictment. You want the splash and story.
Hit that check mark.
Right. And then, the chips are going to fall where they may later on, and we're seeing where those chips are falling, and it's not working out. But our fear is that that doesn't matter. To a normal prosecutor, that does matter. If you have a certain opinion about these cases and they're not going your way, you need to reevaluate your opinion. You're the person who's wrong. But that depends on the prosecutor doing the right thing and seeking justice. If that's not what they're after, then a bunch of acquittals down the road don't mean anything.
Second part I was going to ask, not because I'm questioning what you did, just because I'm curious, fascinated by this. You guys both seem like heavy guns, hired guns.
No pun intended.
And when you watch trials play out, high-profile trials like this, there's the Trump approach where you speak to the media and you hold a press conference on the steps when you walk out, and you do the racehorse hands, flamboyant, speak to the press and educate the people. And then you guys just kind of quietly behind the scenes are plugging away, knocking out strikes. Behind the curtain, is there discussions going on of, do we need to try and do something public? Do we hold a press conference? Do we try and educate the public? Or is that just not y'all's style, or is that not y'all's philosophy? Or was there a strategy to quietly knocking out objectives and not doing any of that? What would you share on that?
So that case was around so long that it's hard to remember exactly what we did in terms of media communications. But I think we did some.
Yeah, we did.
We normally do. We're not shy about talking to the media. We stay within the ethical boundaries of what attorney ethics require. But, part of our job is not only educating a jury, but also educating the public about what is going on and why it may or may not be fair. And so, for example, in the Austin riot cases, where we represented 12 of the 17 indicted, we actually rented a hotel ballroom and held a big press conference because we wanted to educate the community that these indictments weren't going to go anywhere and it was all political theater.
And you were absolutely right. That's what happened, I think, with 17 of the 19 so far.
19 of the 21.
19 of the 21.
Yeah.
The challenge is, so it's a mix, right? So yeah, we're not shy about talking to the media. We've called press conferences, we've done interviews, and we issue press releases in the right cases at the right time. But it's never about, just talking to the media. Is this going to help this case? And the difficulty is not difficulty, but what you need to do is maintain, is this going to help the defense of this client?
Yeah.
And if so, then that's what you do. And if that means total media blackout, that's what you do. And if it's a bunch of talking and grandstanding, then that's what you do. But it's not about doing that just for effect. It's with the ultimate goal down the road in mind. And there's the right time and the right place for all of that stuff.
Okay. I like it.
Good point. Yeah. So they've been indicted. Y'all doing some motions before the court to kind of educate the judge. Talk about the feeling the first day of the trial. You're getting ready. You're looking in the mirror. You're putting a tie on. What are you guys feeling? I mean, because this is going to be a heavy case. There's a lot to go. Y'all have put so much, blood, sweat, and tears into this case. Talk about what you're thinking on your drive to the courthouse.
I'm always excited on trial day. I'm pumped up. Mm-hmm. I'm ready to go because we've
game day
done so much work to get to this point.
Yeah, you're ready to dance.
Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's right, we do represent police officers, but we represent regular people too, right? Somebody gets a DWI, and that trial is different. Every trial is a little bit different. What's unique about police officer cases is there hasn't been one yet where I've driving into work for that first day of trial thinking that we're going to lose or that I need to get my guy out of something he did. He didn't do anything to begin with. So it's I don't want to say it's easy, but when you start with an innocent person, it should be easier to defend that person. Now, there's all these other challenges because of the nature of where we lived and the politics and policing. But again, if there's any sort of pressure or nerves, for me, it's how do I not fuck this up?
Yeah.
Because he is in fact innocent, and if he is convicted, that means I fucked it up.
Well, that's a gorilla on your back. I mean, that's a burden to bear.
Yeah, it sucks.
I've got a completely innocent guy that may go to prison.
Right. It's different when you go to trial with maybe a regular client and you're absolutely guilty. And I know that. That's not my job, and I don't care about that. I'm defending this person. But if they're convicted, well, that's what should have happened.
And that goes back to what we started off with 20 minutes ago is intent or the spirit or what the officer was intending to do when they did something. That's all gone out the door in the review of some of these officers' conduct. In the Amber Geiger trial in Dallas, there's been a few other police incidents where a horrific tragedy, tragic circumstances doesn't always mean there was a crime committed.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just a tragic incident, and unfortunately, somebody may have lost their life or was significantly injured, but because a police officer was involved in that bad tragedy doesn't mean every single time it's a crime. And we've come to it now that something happens, and by God, it must be a crime, and the cop committed it.
That's right. You're working backwards, right?
Yeah.
There was a crime. Now let's find out what it was. But no, that's not true that there was a crime committed. Let's start from maybe and investigate and then reach that decision.
So we've learned that no use of force looks pretty.
No.
And especially to the average civilian who doesn't know anything about law enforcement or the why or the training, the why they do these procedures or take these actions. And so none of these use of force, in custody death cases, the video, none of it looks pretty. But
Because it's not.
it's
Right.
not.
Yeah. It's violent.
It's violent. Right.
Yeah.
This is a use of violence,
Yeah.
and it's tough to look at.
Doesn't mean a crime occurred.
Correct.
The other problem we see is early on people, whether they're personal injury attorneys or the DA, get to the relatives of the decedent. And they convince that person that you're a victim. Your loved one is a victim of police violence. You've heard this term. And then they go on TV and they're screaming bloody murder, and the media loves that. And then you have story after story, which in turn
fuels the fire. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, and we keep saying on here, we hope reasonable people become the vocal majority at some point. And the last trial I testified in as a expert, the plaintiff attorney said, "So you think this force looks good?" And I said, "No, I don't." "So you agree that it doesn't look good?" And I said, "I absolutely agree that it doesn't look good, and I'll testify right now that every use of force you're ever going to see in your life doesn't look good. And if somebody looks at a shooting or an officer having to strike someone and says, 'Oh, that looks awesome,' then maybe they've got a problem. It doesn't look good.
This isn't a football drill.
Making sausage is ugly, but unfortunately you got to do that. And reasonable people understand that concept when you can explain it to them in a civil matter or in a decent manner, not through the perversion of the media, slanted through the media, or some activist attorney that's just trying to make a name for themselves. Or reasonable people get it when they have the opportunity to. But cases like this get so perverted early on that you guys have a mountain to climb to get that turned back around.
Yeah, it does present some difficulty. So, right, we've had, with one particular client we still represent, we've had 2 mistrials for him. And the first mistrial was because there weren't enough people left to be eligible to sit on the jury at the end of 3 days of jury selection.
Wow.
So, yes, and that's due to pretrial publicity and the unfair way that it comes out. So, and it's the same thing every time. It's this. Here's a little snippet of what happened, and sometimes it just blatantly cuts off, preceding events. And maybe they weren't captured, but sometimes no, they were intentionally omitted. And then yes, we're digging out from that hole the entire time, and you can find people to sit on the jury to listen, and even if they have preconceived ideas, the strategy is to find those people who will just listen, even if you think maybe they're against you right now.
Tune in next week for part 2.
And so that was the objective: either show NMI or show that it sometimes it doesn't work. And of course, in this case, it worked beautifully. And funny side note, we were in the same court in front of the same judge as the very first officer case we did together, the Tmpa trial.
So that.
And because it's just such a dramatic and unusual thing. So according to Axon, this is the first live, what do they call it? Live
Tasing?
Exposure.
First live exposure, in a controlled live exposure in a courtroom.
Our bread and butter is legal coverage. Camden, how much of the legal fees are pending? And is there a balance that you guys are owed with the legal fees as far as what Tmpa is owed, or kind of talk about that, because there's some mix up and there's some discussion about what Tmpa didn't do, and we just wanted to kind of clear the air on what hasn't been paid.